All right, good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming tonight. I'd like to call to order the April 7th, 2016 meeting of the City of Bellingham Planning Commission. I'd like to ask everyone to silence cell phones. If you have a laptop, anything electronic that might make some noise, please silence it now. Heather, will you please call the roll?
Ollie Taishi.
Here.
Garrett O'Brien.
Here.
Tom Grinstead. Here. Jeff Brown. Here. Phyllis McKee.
Here.
Steve Crooks.
Here.
Lisa Anderson. Here.
Thank you. Tonight's meeting is a public hearing on the 2016 update to the Bellingham Comprehensive Plan. We've had a number of work sessions. Some of you have attended who are here. I'm sure people watching have watched some of them, and we're going to get into that in a little bit. But first, we have a set of minutes to approve and a standard public comment period to run through. We have one set of minutes from the March 31st meeting. There was, sorry for asking here, but there was a correction that we made. Did that get made? Okay. Yeah. So we'll just do a kind of head nod of everyone. Assume everyone's reviewed the minutes. Unless anyone has any comments, okay to move to approve. Okay. So minutes are approved from March 31st. Before we start, we'll have a public comment period for people to comment on topics unrelated to tonight's meeting. So anything that is not a comment on the Bellingham Comprehensive Plan update, any of the chapters, if you're speaking about that, you want to speak about something else, now's your chance to come up and speak for 3 minutes and let us know your thoughts. And we can just open that up. Is there anyone here who would like to speak? Okay. Seeing no one, we will close the public comment, open public comment, and I think we'll move toward our public hearing. And I was talking to Greg. Staff doesn't have an in-depth presentation at this point. We've seen presentations on all the chapters, and I think this is really an opportunity for the public to kind of formally comment after having seen all these chapters. Is that right, Greg?
Yes, that's correct, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
So just for the commission's information, we went back and looked. This is the 17th meeting dating back to 2013 that the Planning Commission has had on the comprehensive plan update.
And that includes all of our discussion of the growth numbers and the preliminary recommendations and all the individual chapters.
Yes.
Excellent. So, okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to have a public hearing first. We're going to give everybody an opportunity to speak who would like to speak. I have a list of people who've signed up. You'll have 3 minutes to speak about whatever you'd like regarding the comprehensive plan. If you didn't sign up, you can still speak. Just once we've run through the full list, I'll say that's the list. And if anyone didn't sign up and they want to get up and make comments, then just come on down and line up against the wall over there. And just please remember to state your name and address when you come up for the record. And we look forward to hearing from everybody. And just so everybody understands, we have two work sessions scheduled after, or a work session and a final meeting scheduled after this meeting. So the Planning Commission will, after hearing public comment, will have a chance to discuss, ask questions, and then we may move into discussion of specific changes that are proposed tonight, depending on how things go. And then, just so everybody knows, we'll have another meeting if people are interested in continuing to follow what's going on, and then a follow-up meeting after that to make a recommendation if it's necessary. So with that, let's get going. Patrick McKee is the first speaker, and then Jeff Middaugh and Deborah Middaugh.
Good evening. Patrick McKee, Grant Street in the Sunnyland neighborhood. I've come tonight to speak about the land use chapter of the comprehensive plan, specifically about policy LU-19. I'm going to read a section of it. It says, consider developing integrated transportation land use plans along WTA GO lines connecting urban villages where appropriate. The planning process should consider the following: a mix of land uses and higher densities within each corridor, resulting in transportation-oriented planning. WTA GO lines run through many older established Bellingham neighborhoods. WTA GO lines go through Seaholm, Columbia, Birchwood, Leonard Street, Sunnyland, and South Hill. Let me describe for you how LU19 would affect the Sunnyland neighborhood. There is a WTA GO line running right through the middle of the Sunnyland neighborhood along Alabama Street. These WTA transportation corridors are a quarter of a mile in one direction and a quarter of a mile in the other direction. In other words, a quarter mile north of Alabama Street and a quarter mile south of Alabama Street. That's a half mile of the Sunnyland neighborhood. These transportation corridors would use mixed-use development at a higher density than currently exists. This corridor would virtually occupy the 3/4 of the single-family neighborhood that is north of Alabama Street in the Sunnyland neighborhood. 3/4 of this single-family neighborhood, an older, well-established neighborhood, would become part of a transportation corridor, possibly adding commercial use, office use, multifamily use, and at a higher density. It is currently zoned only for single-family detached homes on 5,000 square foot lots. This would have a tremendous impact on the Sunnyland neighborhood if this becomes the policy of the city of Bellingham. I feel that this LU19 needs to be either drastically changed or deleted from the proposed comprehensive plan, because this area of Sunnyland would be a prime target for a transportation corridor development.
About 30 seconds, Patrick.
This is in violation of other sections of the proposed comprehensive plan which speak to preserving neighborhood quality, neighborhood character, and preserving a sense of place. This neighborhood has a very strong sense of place. It's one of the best single-family neighborhoods in the city, and I would hate to see it go into a transportation-oriented development corridor. So I hope you will consider changing LU19. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeff?
My name is Jeff Middaugh. I live at 206 Highland Drive in the South Hill neighborhood. 17 meetings. I was curious why I felt so tired, but I was thinking to myself that meaningful involvement in this complex process is like trying to paint a moving freight train. We make minor progress, but things seem to constantly change. The South Hill neighborhood met last night, April 6th, and the South Hill Neighborhood Association at this meeting of approximately 35 neighbors discussed in an open session the concepts expressed in the current drafts of the comprehensive plan, specifically Chapter 2 and Chapter 4, and the threat that some of this language poses to the single-family residential character of our neighborhood. We took a straw poll and unanimously voted to maintain the integrity and character of our current neighborhood and urged the city and you, the Planning Commission, to support us with precise language in the comprehensive plan to accomplish that goal. At our next June 1st meeting, we will discuss and vote on a formal resolution. We discussed basically 5 principles that I'll go over briefly and I'll submit my comments. One is we need to understand the magnitude of the current density of our neighborhood. How many legal and illegal ADUs are there and what that means in terms of a measure of density. Second, we're concerned about enforcement. With the new rental ordinance, we were told that boarding houses, ADUs, and others would be enforced, but we haven't seen that happen. We'd like to see something precise about how that works. Detached ADUs. In the current drafts, certain neighborhoods, quote, will be given the gift of detached ADUs, and we'd like to know what criteria or numbers or densities will the city use to determine which neighborhoods will get detached ADUs. Fourth is poorly supported references. There are studies in this draft that we don't believe have been fully vetted with the neighborhood or with others, and so we think they should be taken out. And fifth, the current loophole language in the draft comprehensive plan concerns us. There's language that is contrary to our maintaining our current neighborhood character because it provides for exceptions and loopholes in our protection of our current character. Exceptions multiply neighborhood conflicts specifically due to inadequate parking on already crowded streets. Exceptions in these plans aren't really exceptions as they become the rules by the loophole. These loopholes give us great concern because it means, again, that the single-family residential zones become multifamily zones through attrition, lack of enforcement, and administrative permit process overrides. Thank you.
Thank you. So Deborah, and then Ann Mackey and Eric Scott.
Good evening. My name's Deborah Middaugh, South Hill, Highland Drive. I am requesting that you allow our neighborhoods to retain their character. For my neighborhood, South Hill, that is retaining the single-family residential designation. We already have many ADUs, both legal and also without the benefit of legal certification. We already have boarding houses. Please do not create more chaos by allowing detached ADUs in our single-family residential neighborhood. In our particular neighborhood, if you create more density, the parking issues become extremely challenging. As it is sometimes, I worry that the extra vehicles that emergency responders may not be able to reach their destination as quickly as they should be able to. Please consider all the infill that has already occurred, both legal and not legally certified, before allowing higher density. Please do not allow detached ADUs. This would only compound an already existing problem. I would like you to retain the requirement for owner occupancy with all existing and future ADUs. Without that requirement, you are creating multifamily zones in previous single-family residential zones. Originally, we had been told that the rental registration process would find the unregistered ADUs and boarding houses, and we would know the extent of the uncertified units before proceeding with the updating of the plan. Please consider that if growth is allowed without these increases in infrastructure like parking and adequate road size, the safety of the citizens become an issue. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ann Mackey, and I live in the York neighborhood. And I just want to say what a great turnout tonight from various neighborhood representatives. There's more than a dozen people here representing neighborhoods. So it's not a big crowd, but it's definitely great representation. I agree with everything that the other speakers have already said. I want to point out two areas in the comprehensive plan proposal that I'm opposed to. One is policy H7 in the housing chapter that addresses accessory dwelling units. It states, consider allowing detached ADUs in certain neighborhoods. We have no accurate information about how many ADUs currently exist in the city. Why would we want to add more into our backyards? This means we also do not have accurate information about the true densities of these neighborhoods. We've had no enforcement of the existing ADU rules, which requires the owner to live in one of the two dwellings. Nor have we had enforcement of the rule against rooming houses in single-family neighborhoods. As a result, we've had what I refer to as an illegal upzone in these city neighborhoods. This illegal upzone must be addressed before we consider allowing detached ADUs in single-family neighborhoods. My second issue is I oppose H15 in the housing chapter that states, continue implementing the recommendations of the Countywide Housing Affordability Task Force, CHAT. And then it goes on to list out support for detached ADUs in single-family zones. I want to ask, have you read the 58-page CHAT report? It was written more than 8 years ago, before the infill housing toolkit came before the City Council, who voted down the inclusion of the toolkit in single-family neighborhoods. The chat report references many other things that I'm concerned with. One is task number 24, stating, allow detached accessory dwelling units where living units are built over the garage or provided as independent structures on existing single-family properties. This essentially is a rezone of single-family neighborhoods to multifamily. Secondly, and I quote, allow single-family housing unit property owners to convert, add on, or construct stick-built or prefabricated accessory dwelling units. It says nothing about owner occupancy of the detached ADU, which is our current regulation that needs to be enforced. Item 27 of the chat report states, provide waivers to lot size, height, site coverage, parking, setback, buffer, and other dimensional regulations necessary to allow infill development.
About 30 seconds in.
A reference to zoning regulation waivers does not belong in the comprehensive plan. I recommend that the reference to the chat report be removed entirely from the comp plan. I think it's a loaded gun and it's out of place. If the intent of including a reference to the chat was to address the issue of affordable housing, then the comp plan should do that independently. It needs to be a document that stands on its own and not reference another document that I believe is full of zoning and regulatory concerns. Thank you. And I'm going to provide copies of my statement to all of the commissioners and to the staff so that it's included in the public record this time.
Thank you. So Eric Scott and then Nikki Bailey and Tim Hosteller. It looks like Hostettler. Thank you.
Hello, Eric Scott, 2933 McLeod Road, Birchwood Avenue, or McLeod Road and Birchwood neighborhood. This is on the thread of ADUs. Detached ADUs do not belong in single-family zoning, as it constitutes a major upzone to allow two houses on one lot. This is a sneaky, dishonest way to upzone, as it's simply called a different name. This issue is about rental income and profits, so an issue like this would usually be attended by, disproportionately attended by the people looking to profit. The majority of our neighbors, however, are not even aware of these forces quietly conspiring to change their neighborhood. These neighbors bought into a neighborhood zone single family, one house on a lot. Homes with a known amount of privacy and quietness in the street and the neighborhood overall. Now the city and some ambitious neighbors want to push for a major upzone to serve their financial interests. They're asking for a big change to suit them. We should not be having to spend our time to beg for mercy from the city that is supposed to support us and represent us. ADUs have nothing to do with affordable housing. The property owners that want this are motivated by money. It's a financial investment, so they will charge the maximum rent they can. The property owner will position the ADU as far away from their own house as possible so that they can preserve their quality of life and their privacy. And therefore, it will be placed near the neighbor's house as close as possible. So that means the neighbor will be subjected to the additional noise, cigarette smoke, arguments, whatever else that rental will bring. The property owners that want these ADUs argue that it's a family issue. They want to bring their family in, but that's not a very honest issue or not a very honest argument. How many of them would argue or agree to only immediate family members to stay in that ADU with enforcement and penalties? Probably not that many. A new rental in a neighborhood's backyard overlooking your once private backyard will ruin many people's homes, as we've seen up in the Birchwood neighborhood on Cherry Street. The city essentially allowed two homes to be built on one lot through a series of variances that ruined that neighbor's home. The lady came here to testify about that. These are real issues, real people, and real homes.
About 30 seconds, Eric.
So a major up zone like this, allowing 2 houses on 1 lot, would be another hit to the working class, as it's our neighborhoods that would be affected, not the wealthier neighborhoods. So it would be another, it would be essentially a slap in the face to our neighborhoods. Thank you.
Thank you. So we've got Nikki Bailey, and then Tim Hosteller, then Charles Law.
Well,
Oh,
I
sorry.
certainly agree with the people that did their homework and that sort of thing, and, but I guess I'm not understanding why this keeps coming up. We've tried to have it voted down and not. We've demonstrated over and over at the last 17 meetings that we do not want this. And just like the last gentleman said, that we invested in our home, we hope that it will retain its value and that other people won't come in and try to sneak it in when we're not looking to ruin that investment that we spent our life and our entire life, and then when we're too old to make up for something that came up and ruined the things that we were going to retire on. So I just certainly want to agree with everybody, but certainly the detached units, as what it says, to not even be considered in the existing neighborhoods as was previously stated. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Tim Hostetler. I'm part of the Seahome Neighborhood Board, live in Seahome, and I'm basically going to reiterate the comments that I gave you on August 20th, almost verbatim. Actually, I'll condense them. So not a lot has happened in that time period. I guess that's the way to take that. At the ADU level, at the single-family residential zoning level, we're having some major breakdowns, and that's what's been expressed consistently from the previous speakers. In Seahome, it's even more so because of proximity to Western. As I mentioned on the 20th, there's urban villages which are already been planned for. They fit in with the transportation network, the transportation planning. It is the way things should go. Accessory dwelling units are simply going to be a chipping away at the single-family residential zoning that is in place now. The ADU program has not been implemented. As I have mentioned in the letter which you have in front of you, there are over 20 ADUs which are not recognized at all in the city records. The city says we have 2. There has not been an inventory done for this comprehensive planning process. Thus, there can be no analysis. That's been stated many times over. So I just want to emphasize that. Finally, in your packet on August 20th, the staff made some very interesting comments, very appropriate. Ensure vitality and character of established residential neighborhoods and have the integrity of the neighborhoods upheld. That's what they are asking you and the City Council to look at on the ADUs. Currently, the wording of it is not there at all. Thank you.
Thank you. After Charles, Linda, and then Jeff Kochman. Linda Twitchell.
Charles Law, Bellingham. I think it's simple arithmetic, simple math that we're overlooking. According to Albert A. Bartlett, the author of the first law of sustainability, the winner of the AAPT Distinguished Service Citation, the Thomas Jefferson Award, the Robert Stearns Award, the Robert Milken Award, the AAPT Melba Newell Phillips Award, the M.K. Hubbard Award for Excellence in Energy Education, the Lifetime Achievement Pacesetter Award, and the Global Media Award for Excellence in Population Reporting. Simple arithmetic shows that even small rates of growth, if continued, adds up to absurd, large, and unsupportive population sizes and rates of consumption. That's what we're looking at right now. Listening to these ADUs, listening to 2 homes on 1 lot. You have an opportunity here. You have an opportunity to tell the financial, state board that we've reached our limit. You've given us a growth mandate that is not sustainable. For example, according to Albert Bartlett, a simple 1% rate of growth in the present human population would result in a doubling of the population in each 70 years. That's less than 3 generations. Professor Bartlett had often explained how sustainable growth is a contradiction. His view was based on the fact that the modest percentage growth will equate to a huge escalation over a relatively short period of time. Exponential growth may be a potential disastrous when applied to human population. A population of 10,000 individuals, if were to grow at a constant rate of 7% per annum, would result in a population size of 10 million after 100 years.
30 seconds, Charles.
According to the Washington State Office of Financial Management, the city of Bellingham, for example, in 2013 had a population of 92,660. An estimated growth by 2038 would be 128,578. According to the Bartlett math, if a 1% growth equals 2 times 128,578, in 70 years, we would have 257,156 people living in the city of Bellingham alone. These numbers seem to be unrealistic. Robust estimates considering the economic extent, the theory of an adequate land supply, and may undermine any efforts to obtain a sustainable quality of life.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Linda Twitchell, Building Industry Association, Whatcom County. Much of our testimony we have tried to do throughout so that we don't get caught in 3 minutes here. I would like to remind you, please, that we would ask that reference to inclusionary zoning be taken out of the comp plan. I was frankly amazed that staff reinserted it after you actually voted last spring to get rid of it. I still maintain that it does not meet the goals that some believe it would, and that it's not to your best advantage or the city's best advantage. On a larger look at this all, let me remind everybody, please, that no growth or limited growth is not an option under state law. The Growth Management Act, when it was enacted back in the 1990s, changed the ballpark. You used to be able to do comp plans, and those who proposed growth could intentionally set goals, et cetera, to try and limit growth. What the Growth Management Act tells us is you have to project what's going to happen, and then you have to accommodate it. The idea being we try to plan for what we think is going to come and do our best job of doing that. Now in Bellingham, the current comp plan poses problems because the current UGA, according to the planning department, is built out, but the city council voted not to expand the UGA. The current remaining buildable residential land, according to the planning department, is mostly impacted by wetlands, steep slopes, other critical area concerns, which makes it difficult or expensive to build there. And as has been amply noted this evening, most neighborhoods are not interested in infill. It's fine elsewhere as long as you don't do it in my backyard. So what are you going to do? How are we going to accommodate growth short of pushing it outside the city. I would suggest that is the largest question facing those dealing with the comp plan right now. It's not an easy thing to do. The Building Industry Association suggests we allow a variety of housing, different options. I want to congratulate you on your vote to try to expand the UGAs. I think that was, in planning terms, the smart move. One point I would like to make is not all of the work and debate that you guys do always is reported fully to City Council. Please let them know why you voted the way you voted or why you're doing what you do in the next few meetings, to make sure they understand where you're coming from. If you disagree and they outvote you, that's the way it goes. But I would hope that at least we have open communication and that the City Council members, maybe a joint meeting with them would even be appropriate, I don't know, but somehow make sure they know why you're doing what you're doing. Because you have put incredible time and effort into this. And I want to thank everybody here for the work you've put in. It's been more than a year, and you've worked a heck of a lot harder than I have had this, so thank you for that.
About 30 seconds.
Okay, I'll call it quits with that. Good, thank you.
Thank you. So Jeff Kochman and then Steve James is on the list, and then that's the end of the list. So if anyone would like to speak after Steve, just come on down. You don't have to come down now if you don't want to, but just slowly filter down. Thank you. Jeff?
Okay, Jeff Kochman. I'm with the Barclay Company, 2200 Rimland Drive, Suite 250. I'd like to talk about the building of Barclay Village, the comp plan goals and policies, and the building of Barclay Village. There's a few things to note. I think they're pretty key things, and I've referenced them in a number of letters that I've written to the Planning Commission. Housing units and density will be a large part of urban village development going forward. The need to make sure that that policy, that goal can occur is important for success, obviously. Land use flexibility. In order to address housing and to build a strong, vibrant, and dynamic mixed-use development, this concept needs to be considered. It is critical to help allow the best use of the land in the right place. Regional infrastructure, systems, or larger scale solutions. The opportunity to build these in conjunction with the city will help significantly in achieving success. They include stormwater, wetland mitigation, parks and open space, parking, multimodal transportation systems that includes roads, bike lanes, trails, and pedestrian paths, and then anything else that can help. Specifically on land use, or on the various chapters, I'd like to make a few comments. On the land use chapter, LU 10, which references providing innovative tools to achieve housing success that is affordable to many. The content there we think is great. We'd like to propose that the following be added. Parking consolidation and broader shared parking concepts with adjacent property owners or use types. Something like that. Parking is always a challenge when you're building. To the extent you can share parking, which we've done in Barclay Village, can help. And it certainly can help make things more affordable because you don't have to spend the money on it. LU 11, neighborhood plan updates. We propose adding a comment or bullet point about making the process to update the neighborhood plans based on the comprehensive plan directives either administrative or somehow more certain than that someone can therefore rely on to move forward on a project. Right now, there's a time lag between the comprehensive plan and then the neighborhood plan. Don't know when that's going to be updated. Do you rely on the comprehensive plan to give you direction? You'd like to, but the neighborhood plan doesn't always provide for that. And I did reference that in another letter I sent previously back in October. Goal LU 12, foster vibrant urban villages. The language added offers very encouraging support of urban villages. The emphasis on targeted incentives, which is LU 15, is something we would like to see occur in Barclay, and the mention of working on coordinated infrastructure, LU 17, is consistent with our plans.
About 30 seconds, Jeff.
Okay,
Sorry.
All right. We offered comment on incentives previously, and we'd like you to reference, or we'd like to again propose those. LU 26 was preserving industrial land. Probably the big thing there is we built office buildings in industrial zone land, which is allowed. They're multi-story. I think they're a good use of the land. They provide lots of jobs, especially on if you think about a per square foot basis. There's a number of people that work in them, and therefore we're addressing job creation and the economic development with that. That supports part of the greater flexibility in zoning or land use throughout. The housing chapter, goals H1 and H2, we agree with those. There's a couple of comments on policy. We'd like to propose policy H13 and H16 be added. I'll send that to you. Park trails and open space chapter. I mentioned this last week. There are comments I'll continue to send and reinforce. Economic development and environmental chapters. Again, we're supportive of economic development, obviously, and we think the comments in the chapter references do support that. Capital facilities and utilities, CF 13 and 37 do talk about joint infrastructure projects, which is great. T1 is transportation related incentives for urban villages, which we've used before and they have been very helpful. And then community design, we generally feel at Barclay we do follow some pretty good design standards, so there you go. Conclusion, the work that has occurred by staff and yourselves is very supportive of urban villages. We have proposed a few changes that I'll send to you. And the comments that are made are mostly, in most if not all cases, are based upon experience of doing this for a long period of time. So the new changes we're proposing, we feel will have an added impact and benefit and will assist in making the urban village that we're building successful. Thank you.
Jeff. Okay, sorry, Steve James, and then anyone else who'd like to speak after Steve.
Good evening. My name is Steve James. A little disclaimer, some of you know me as the president of the Puget Neighborhood Association. I'm not speaking on behalf of the association tonight. I'm speaking as a citizen of Bellingham. And thank you for allowing me to speak to you. The first thing that comes to mind for me when we're talking about ADUs, and that's what I want to talk about tonight, is how in the world can we talk about something that we don't even know how many we have in the city? I mean, staff and the city is doing a good job with the new rental ordinances to try and get a handle on what's within our city, but I have, for the life of me, cannot figure out how we can write into a comprehensive plan provisions for ADUs without knowing what exists in the city right now. It would seem to make sense to defer anything in the comprehensive plan until we know what we have in the city and what we have to deal with, and then write a plan that works around the existing condition, not what we'd like it to be. To me, the comprehensive plan is a plan, and it sounds like what we're doing with it, or at least some of the sections I saw, are turning it into a regulatory document, and that's not what it's there for. The comprehensive plan is broad ideas that gives us a chance to decide where we want to go, and we do have some control over that. And to start writing recommendations for regulations within the comp plan, I think far exceeds what it should be doing. We write a plan, we write a comprehensive plan, then we turn it over to staff, we turn it over to the citizens to then build on that through their council and through the commission, not the other way around. I think the way the ADUs are written up in the comprehensive plan right now, it's inherently unfair to older neighborhoods. I live in Puget. In most of the neighborhoods, most of the houses that I live in have a covenant that don't allow for ADUs to be built in them. Edgemoor has covenants. Cordata has a lot of the new development has covenants that don't allow them. The older, bigger lotted homes in the lettered streets in Columbia don't have these covenants in place, and it seems to me they're being targeted for ADUs and for the density. I think that's not, I think we need to come up with something that's more fair, that looks at ADUs either throughout the city or not throughout the city, but not to just target out some local or some of the older neighborhoods that have the larger lots. To me, detached ADUs are just, they equal dynamite. I mean, detached ADUs, we just can't, I don't see how you can regulate. But I was standing in Lowe's the other day buying some things for my little house, and I listened to two contractors behind me talking about how you can do certain things to get around the existing regulations to get an ADU in. I mean, there are people that are working really hard to avoid the regulations, and they're not being enforced. And now we're going to add make it even more complicated by saying we'll have detached ADUs, and somehow we're going to make sure that somebody who owns the property is going to live in one of them. I just don't think that's doable, at least in the existing world that we live in today. Maybe someday. We can't enforce the existing current regulations we have now, and to plan to make them more complicated, I think is just it's an equation for disaster.
About 30 seconds, Steve.
Yeah, we need to get a handle on what we have, and then once we know what we have, we can plan and work to make it better. Thank you for allowing me to speak to you.
Thank you. Okay, so that's the end of the people who've signed up. So again, anyone else who'd like to speak? Looks like we have at least one speaker Come up, state your name, and let's hear your thoughts.
David Cunningham, McLeod Road in Birchwood. There's been a lot said about the detached ADUs and ADUs in general, and I'm pretty much in agreement with all the things that have been said. I don't know if you guys know or not, but some of the students at Western were doing a project for their urban planning class, and they're doing it in Birchwood. I've gone to all the meetings there and talked with the students, and I think they're doing some really great work. One of the things that I'm concerned about is if we start putting a higher density in our neighborhood, in the Birchwood neighborhood, and probably the same with other neighborhoods, it degrades the quality of the neighborhood. One of the things, and I'm just saying that as a prelude to the idea of what the students have been doing, is looking at the urban core of the Birchwood neighborhood, which is at the corner of Birchwood and Northwest Avenue, where Albertsons is, and as most of you know, Albertsons is closing, I think at the end of this month. So we're losing a major store in our neighborhood that a lot of people rely on. One of my concerns is that I don't see the city doing enough to try to support the urban core of Birchwood to improve the quality of it so we can bring in better and more stores that will serve the neighborhood, which will actually improve the quality of our neighborhood and attract better stores. Not that Albertsons is a perfectly good store. It's just that we have some pretty rundown buildings and rundown stores and businesses in that neighborhood, in that area. So one of the things the students have been proposing, which I think, in my opinion, is much better than putting ADUs in a neighborhood that doesn't want them, and that is the multi-use in the urban core that allows residential, which has been proven so well in downtown Bellingham. I mean, we don't want 4- and 5-story buildings in downtown Birchwood, obviously, but it would be much better, it seems to me, to use that as the place to improve the density or provide more of the kind of buildings that we're talking about. When people talk about ADUs, you're talking about small units. That's exactly what you usually get when you're building mixed use in a downtown, in a commercial area like that. And I would really like to see that encouraged before the ADUs are even considered, especially detached ADUs. I agree with the last gentleman who said we don't know how many ADUs there are in our neighborhood. I know right across the street from me is a lady who bought this house. She lives in what was supposed to be an office in the back. She rents the front out. And I know she was caught by the city last year and forced to take the kitchen and refrigerator or whatever it is, the stove, I guess it is, out of the unit. Well, after the city finished with the inspection and all those things were taken care of, she's been in there remodeling the thing extensively, and I'm sure that the kitchen and the refrigerator and everything has gone back in. That's the kind of thing that we have to get a handle on before we start building more ADUs.
About 30 seconds, David. Sorry.
One last thing about the ADUs. One of my concerns is, one of the things that's indicated in the general plan is that you're only supposed to have a certain number of ADUs in a neighborhood. Well, what if we say, let's build some more ADUs, we're going to have detached now, and then all these detached ADUs come along. We make an inventory of what's available there, and all of a sudden we're over the number that are allowed in that neighborhood. Then what are we going to do? Are we going to raise the number that's allowed in the neighborhood, or are we going to force some of the illegal units to be taken out? There are complications there that I think, my opinion is, they haven't been adequately considered, and I'd really like to see that more work done with that before we go on with detached ADUs especially. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Commissioners. Bill Geyer, 1008 16th Street, and I'm accredited by the American Institute of Certified Planners, as many of the Commissioners are aware. May 22nd, 1969. May 22nd, 1969. Established 20,000 square foot lots in Bellingham, half-acre lots. Most of those areas have that same zoning today, 47 years later. Planning commissioners have been on the forefront of transitioning this community to be in conformance to the Growth Management Act so that we are a vibrant urban center with a diversity of housing stock. We're not there yet, as you know, I applaud your courage, both on the growth boundary and other things that you've done in the past. You're looking forward, and that sort of forward-looking needs to be maintained in this comprehensive plan. There are presently 10 locations in Bellingham that have that, as you know, the RS 20,000 zoning. Birchwood areas 1, 19, and 20, Edgemore 4 and 7, Whatcom Falls 11, Samish 5 and 6, Silver Beach 4, and South 9. There are also 6 other areas that have an RS 15,000 square foot density. Happy Valley 7, Columbia 1, Edgemore 1 and 6, Roosevelt 3, and Silver Beach 1. I may have missed a couple because there's close to 240 separate zones in Bellingham, as we know. But changes to density to help you achieve the GMA start here with your policy recommendation to the council, and ultimately they are responsible for making the decision. They're the elected officials. But why are these areas protected? Why do we continue after 47 years to set these locations aside and say they have some level of favoritism, they must be half-acre lots? Why do we do that? That's a pinnacle question. But some will say, well, we cannot change the density. We can't have that much. Well, yes, you can. The comprehensive plan, as you know, identifies the appropriate densities to serve our market, to serve our families, to serve our workers. And you know that you have densities that range from a 7,200 up on so-called low density, then the mid density, and it goes beyond that. But the plan can identify the policies, and it links it to the transportation utility components. That's what GMA requires. You can also make changes to the regulations, the underlying zoning code and the subdivision code, so that the density is achieved by right. What I mean by that is if you have a 10-acre parcel, and if it's, say, 4 units per acre, it's a 40-unit yield. Well, when you take a project like that through review, which I've done over the past couple of decades, you lose about 20% of the unit yield. It's simply because of the application of other various controls in the subdivision code. You can change that by saying if you've defined the density by the comp plan, the density is primary. And then you have to work around within the other significant environmental regulations and design criteria to achieve the density. And folks will say, well, we can't do that. We have to have minimum lot standards. No, you don't. We don't have a diversity in housing stock in our community to meet the various income levels that we have or that we're experiencing this decade and forward. We don't have that. There is an overabundance of single-family detached that prices people out of an ownership perspective. If we open the housing forms, as you've done with the infill toolkit, you can then, through townhouses, attached units, garden courts, and others, you can achieve those densities.
About 30 seconds, Bill.
Okay, so I'm going to speak in behalf and support of policies that you are considering, particularly land use policy, LU1, in support of that, because in that you're stating that housing forms should be diverse in residential areas, and you list out those different forms I mentioned. I applaud that. That's a good move because, again, this is not 1969. Policy LU3 in the land use chapter, page 5. It identifies residential low density of 7,200 square feet or more. I would suggest that you change the language to say 7,200 square feet or 10,000 or even 15,000. In other words, don't let the ghost of 1969 return with a 20,000 square foot limit. Policy LU8, off-campus housing. You've seen the battles that we've had, and some of my acquaintances and friends in the audience have seen that. I would suggest that for student housing, particularly multifamily student housing, in your policies, recommend that that be relegated as a permitted use into only residential multiple zones or urban villages. I would further suggest that you're probably best to have that in locations that aren't that are at least 4,000 square feet or maybe 3,600 square feet in their density. In other words, it prevents the type of two-year battle we had on the one location in the Puget neighborhood. I think you should set some policies towards that. Like Mr. Kochman, I'm in agreement with LU10. That's the right direction, and same with LU11. And I'm going to finish with one comment that leads over to your commercial and industrial lands. This will be on page 12. There's a policy there that speaks to trying to maximize the efficiency of land in the commercial industrial areas. I suggest that you add a policy to minimize...
Bill, can you please move through quickly?
Yes, I got this last one. Add a policy to minimize the square footage that... Oh, you want to come up and interrupt? Okay. Minimize the impact of utilities that lose land that can be used for commercial and industrial uses. And then also a parallel in your capital facilities component, page 9, particularly under stormwater. I would encourage the regional stormwater policy to expand out so that you look at potentially a citywide stormwater facility that can serve all the industrial and commercial lands, because that will be hand in hand with the policy to maximize and have the greatest amount of use of your commercial industrial lands. Okay?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Clayton? The reason we restrict everyone to the same amount of time is because it's a matter of fairness. So it's really important for speakers to try and respect that. And if you hear the buzzer, just take that thought that you're on, finish it, and if you have additional thoughts, you can provide those to us in writing. Because it's really just a matter of fairness to all the speakers that we do that. So thank you. And I don't want to have to be a tough guy up here. I asked the speakers to kind of like self-regulate. So just so everybody knows. Clayton.
Hello, my name's Clayton Petrie. I live on a half-acre lot in Birchwood. Hey, so the base job here is to review what's happened, evaluate the results, and adjust your plan to fix it. And you guys have been told over and over during these other 17 meetings that, you know, you guys are moving forward with basically the same plan. So I wanted to point out that Bellingham, in its first 7 years under growth management, captured 62.4% of all the growth in the county. Since then, it's performed very poorly. The bottom page is from your own comp plan, and it talks about the same thing. You guys are down, have been down in the 20s for capture as far as overall county growth. I think that's a big problem. I think that there's basically moving forward with basically the same plan. You're not going to see any change in your new lower capture rates. So that brings me to the targets, or to the triggers that you guys had asked for the reserves. And I saw a little bit of reserve language, but nothing about triggers and when those reserves should be added. I know you asked for that, and I'd like to ask you to ask for that again. And then I wanted to talk about countywide planning policies, specifically D2. And what it says is urban growth areas for cities shall include those areas contiguous to cities and with urban characteristics as defined by the Act. And you had the planning director tell you over and over that the U Street UGA Reserve has those characteristics, those urban characteristics, and that, yeah, of course that area is going to be, you know, part of Bellingham. And, you know, these countywide planning policies are above and beyond your own comp plan. The cities and the county agreed to them, and I think you guys should take another look and maybe make a recommendation that the city council take another look at that. These are the most powerful policies there are in growth management comprehensive plans. So I wanted to make sure you guys saw that.
About 30 seconds, Clayton.
What's that?
About 30 seconds.
Okay. So anyways, I just ask that you guys take another look at that area. If you don't think that D2 applies to the U Street UGA Reserve, I'd like to know why. I don't see any way around that. But I ask that you take another look at that, and because I really think that could help with bringing the capture rate back up, at least somewhat, that direction as opposed to the lower direction that you've been moving. Thank you.
Thank you, Clayton.
I don't know how to turn it off.
Anybody else who'd like to speak?
Hi, I'm Louise Bjornson, and I'd like to thank you for all your work on this. When I was in the City Council, I voted for the ADU ordinance. After much public input, we voted for attached ADUs, owner-occupied. They are more environmentally sound with shared walls. They preserve green space, garden space, play area, more sunny areas. We voted against detached ADUs in single-family neighborhoods again and again and again. They are not as environmentally sound with no shared walls. There are less play area, less garden area, less sun, more shade and unusable space, more impact to the neighbors. Once that soil is paved over, it is gone forever. Can you imagine the shock if you come home one day and have a big wall of a detached ADU next door to your backyard? Oops, someone changed the rules when you weren't looking. You have, all of a sudden, lost your privacy and that nice sunny backyard. Especially on narrow lots, the impact is huge. It is not what you expected to happen when you put your life savings into a house with a single-family neighborhood. You expected only one house on the lot next door. Adding even a few detached ADUs changes the character of the neighborhood, especially if you happen to be the unlucky person with one built next to you. However, some neighborhoods have covenants to protect people from that kind of impact, so it only happened in the older, unprotected neighborhoods. When this was first proposed, it was only to be in new neighborhoods, so that when people bought into those areas, they would know what to expect. That is a much more fair process. Birchwood neighborhood already has a lot of challenges. It is the lowest income neighborhood in the city, with 67% free and reduced lunch in the school. It is near Alderwood, which is 100% free and reduced lunches, and Cordata at 62%. We have over 5,000 people without our share of parks and open space, and we have lots of apartments, and we have West Maplewood and all its challenges. Birchwood is a historic Victory Garden neighborhood laid out with long lots that historically provided food during tough times. It has some of the best soil in the city. It's a very important resource. People are rediscovering those garden areas again, and it's becoming more needed with so many low-income people in that neighborhood. Areas with good garden space need to be preserved for the future. I request that page 33 replace the word existing with the word new. That is how it was originally proposed, a much more fair process that ADUs, detached ADUs would only go into new neighborhoods, not existing. Page 34, H7, take out the phrase detached ADUs in single-family neighborhoods. It's not appropriate. Page 35, H15, should be eliminated. Why is there reference to a report in the comprehensive plan? People don't know what that report is, and it happened a long time ago.
About 30 seconds, Louise.
Page 29, population forecasts do not necessitate upzones, so why push for the detached ADUs? Our neighborhoods have value, so please treat them as such. The urban villages is where we decided to have more density. Let's continue on that path. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you take us home?
You didn't think I was going to sit this one out.
Oh.
Dick Conaboy, South 46th Street in Bellingham. You should all have received a copy of my comments, but I want to highlight a few of them here before you, and also for those who can't be here and are watching it at home. The land use chapter starts out with a statement somewhere in the beginning: build a community that is resilient to adverse events, including natural disasters and climate change. And I'd like to add another adverse event to that. The city needs to consider financial collapse and crises. What will the city do when the tax base founders and property values plunge during the next inevitable crash? We experienced a terrible downturn about 8 years ago, but we are now acting as if that was an anomaly. The city owes it to its citizens to plan for the good as well as the bad, but I see no sign of this happening with the comp plan, where all is happy growth. Incentives. When I hear the word incentives, I reach for my wallet to see if it's still there. Incentives are essentially transfers of payments from citizens to developers, ostensibly to bolster profits. We normally tolerate this because there is a greater good, such as affordable housing or housing in specific places. Developers claim, and as far as I've seen without specific data, that they need these breaks to build as the city wishes. The citizens pick up the tab, but what exactly is that tab? Should not the city indicate the cost to the citizens of these breaks on taxes, transportation fees, and other impact fees? Should not the dollar amounts be made public as part of any specific development package? ADUs, they've been talked about a lot here tonight, and I won't belabor the point too much, except to say they shouldn't be considered at all until such time as a detailed density study be made of all neighborhoods. The necessity of having this study before proceeding must be included in the comp plan policy statements. And continuing on with density, we need to be wary of the overall average household size versus what actually exists in a neighborhood. The figure 2.24, which I think is the average size for a dwelling unit here, might be somewhat representative of households in some areas with multifamily housing, especially with apartments, but not representative of all of single-family areas where 50% of the homes are rented and crammed with renters seeking to lower their housing costs. York, Seahome, South neighborhoods come to mind. Actual by-neighborhood density figures are a must and should be included in this paragraph of the comp plan, the one on ADUs.
About 30 seconds, Dick.
Okay, last one. I'd like to reiterate support for Ann's comment regarding the chat report. Adopting this by reference, it's an 8-year-old plan, and it's a really bad choice. It was a county-wide endeavor, and there were no representatives from Bellingham's neighborhoods on that task force. It's an idea document. It may be okay as a policy statement, but it is woefully inadequate since it is not city-specific. It is also now outdated by nearly a decade. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, is there anyone else who'd like to make a comment during the public hearing? Okay, seeing no one, we will close the public hearing on this topic. And I would like to say thank you to all the public speakers, and personally, particularly to everyone who brought up specific policies that they were concerned with. Often we hear, broad scope comments, which are important, but it's really helpful to hear concerns about specific policies so we can drill down at what you're really worried about. So I appreciate people, a number of speakers, going to that level of detail, which we don't always get. So we're going to move on to discussion. And staff, do you want to make any comments on any of the public comment?
Well, I think what we'd like to do is ponder what we've heard tonight, add those comments to the comment tracker, and prepare responses. I guess what would be most helpful for us from the commission tonight is if there are issues, certain policies or just general issues that you would like to spend more time talking about that aren't identified in the comment tracker, that would be helpful for us. We've tried to make note of all of the suggestions that you've made for changes, and we'll go through those at your work session so you can make final recommendations on those potential changes. But if there's anything else based on what you've heard tonight or the written comments that you received that you would like to see us address or that you would like to spend time talking about, now would be a good time to let us know. There are, I think, 56 separate issues that are covered in the Planning Commission comment tracker, and I think we've noted about 26 separate changes that you've offered up at this point in the process. And we, as I said, we'll go through those with you to make sure that you're, as a group, comfortable with making those changes, those recommended changes to the council. If there's anything else, like I said, that you would like to see us address or spend time talking about at your upcoming work sessions, let us know either now or in the next few days so that we can be prepared and have the appropriate staff here to help you work through those. We weren't expecting to start going through this tonight, but it's up to you guys what you want to do. I think we'd like to ponder what we heard, and perhaps you would too, and we've received quite a few written comments just in the last day or so that we would also like to spend some time thinking about.
Thank you. I think it would benefit the commission to have a little time to absorb what we heard tonight, and also the volume of public comment that we received recently before we give you guys a lot of feedback. on things that might be missing that we want to add. At least for me, I know I'm not necessarily prepared to kind of to dig into that. Obviously, anyone here who wants to bring any particular issues up that would, that we would like to see talked about that aren't in the comment tracker, if you have them, then let's have a discussion with staff about them. Is Greg, so I'm understanding correctly, the intent is to actually go through all of the comments that generated changes?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So you want to go through that item by item kind of and get our...
Yeah, because we tried to make note of everything, and in order to make these formal recommendations for changes to council, we need an action by the commission, so we need, at least 4 of you to agree, yes, we want to change that particular policy, and here's the wording that we'd like to recommend.
Okay. We haven't talked as a body much about how to tackle this. I do want to give the Planning Commission an opportunity to go through each of these comments, because these are pretty well quantified and we can read through these, but also to bring up new issues or issues that maybe they think didn't get captured in this, although I think you guys did a really good job of kind of picking up most everything we talked about over those meetings. But anybody have any thoughts? I know Jeff, you thought Lisa had originally kind of suggested maybe we start with the comment tracker, because that'll give us a little bit more time to absorb these new ideas. I understand you need feedback from us, not next Thursday at the meeting, because you might not be able to have the staff available. So it would be, is it like a deadline? You want to talk about like when you'd need comments from us to add new information where it would be reasonable to get staff to the meeting?
Either tonight or in the next few days.
Couple of
We've
days.
got work sessions scheduled for the upcoming 2 Thursdays. So,
okay. So like by Monday.
The sooner you let us know if there's something here that's not reflected here that you want to talk about, the better we can be prepared, both for our staff and for any other city staff that we think should be here. So,
gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, sooner the better.
Jeff, you have a thought?
Actually, I had a follow-up on public comment.
Oh, okay. Well,
go back, or do you want to stay there?
Yeah, we can go there. Does anybody else have a thought on how we tackle all this? Or you've got a question on it, Lisa? You had a thought too. Go ahead, Steve.
Let's say we've got a statement in the tracker. It says sidewalks are no longer good. Okay, and then we've got a comment from staff, sidewalks are good. Okay, so we've got a standoff here. We've got 2 different thoughts. Sidewalks either way. So what happens? Does this body have to make a motion to staff via the motion process to push our point of view? Or does staff's comments overrule what we had to say? So I'm really kind of unclear as to what do we do when we have 2 conflicting points of view.
Well, let me clear it up for you then, Steve. If you have language that you would like to see, something you would like to see changed, the motion process is the best way to do that. We take a vote. If 4 of you agree that it should be changed, that's the recommendation that will go forward to City Council.
This is our recommendation. So, yeah. Thank you, Greg. Lisa, and then Jeff, we can move on to some comments on comment.
So originally I was thinking, because I'm kind of a linear person, was to go through the 26 changes that we requested and approve, or support or not support. But I hesitate a little bit because there are, I think, some very valid comments individuals have made tonight that may necessarily affect some of these changes. Like we may need to expand it or add to it. So I hesitate a little bit because there was a lot thrown out at us. So if we go through tonight and say under the land use chapter number 1, we agree to it, but then in reviewing the notes and coming back next week saying, oh, wait a second, I didn't realize that this comment affected this one, would we be able to go back and revisit it and change it, or would tonight's decision, if we go through with this, be final?
No, we didn't expect that you would go through this tonight. We wanted you to ponder what you heard tonight, and then we'll start working our way through this next week. So you can absolutely, just because there are suggested changes in here, you can, until you make a formal motion and recommend something officially, we can change the language based on what you heard tonight or at any other point.
Can we make some additional suggestions based on some of the testimony we heard tonight?
If there are issues that you think should be addressed or changes that you think should be made that are not reflected in here, then yes, absolutely. You can do it tonight, or you can send them to us in writing. Either way.
I have hopefully two easy questions. One is just because I'm having one of those brain bubbles. When is the next time the comp plan comes before us for another revision? I know it's a long plan, but it gets revisited. When would the next one come back?
State law says you have to update every 8 years. So, and we generally start about 2 years ahead of the deadline. So 2024 would be the next deadline. So around 2021, 2022 is the next time we would do a full update.
And I'm pretty sure I know this answer, but I just want to verify it. A comment was made tonight about lot sizes, and it referenced various neighborhoods, but it also mentioned one which does have a covenants. Does the city have the ability to break covenants so that the disbursement of additional housing is equitable across all socioeconomic neighborhoods? An example is, if we wanted to say everyone has to do their fair share if we're going to do ADUs, therefore Edgemore would have to take in about 18 because of their lot size, but they have a covenant saying that that cannot happen. Does the city have the ability to go over that covenants and say this will be applied?
The city enforces zoning requirements, so if the zoning code allowed ADUs in the Edgemore neighborhood, but the covenants did not, covenants are a private contract between property owners in a subdivision generally, and they're enforced by the subdivision association or the homeowners association. They're not enforced by the city. The city only enforces zoning rules. So if ADUs are allowed in the Edgemore neighborhood, they're allowed under the city zoning code. That's what we would enforce. That's what we go by. If covenants say something else, that's a private situation between the homeowners association and the property owner.
But more than likely would not happen unless that owner wanted to have the ADU and was willing to take it through a legal course in order to not have it enforced through that neighborhood association. I would assume that would be the outcome.
Again, the city would only enforce the zoning rules that are in place. Anything that happens that violate a private covenant is something that has to be addressed between the homeowners association and the property owner.
I've seen this happen before, not with ADUs, but with other covenants, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the city would issue a permit, for example, if the zoning allowed an ADU, and then it would be the responsibility of the members of that homeowners association to engage in legal action against that homeowner to prevent them from violating their set of covenants. So, you know, you can go get the permit from the city, but if your neighbors are well organized and they have an association that's well organized and they're opposed to the idea of something, whether it's an overheight fence or, you know, a setback reduction or something, they can fight you on it and stop you. It's an issue. It's a good question. Jeff?
I can actually shed even more light on that. I used to live on Park Ridge, and somebody up the street did put in a legal ADU. The homeowners association was dormant. Not the homeowners. The covenants were dormant because the association that was supposed to be set up in the 1950s had lingered away. There were members that tried to reactivate it. It ended up in a lawsuit. It ended up a whole lot of grief, but it ended up with people moving away. But basically, it's not the neighborhood association that has any role in it. It is separate, individual, subdivision by subdivision covenant. It's that private arrangement. And so, if you say Edgemore, there's probably a dozen or 15 different potential covenant enforcement organizations that may or may not be dormant. So it's a mess, that's all. But it's not the neighborhood association that is controlling that by any means.
Or the city, for that matter. Right. Yeah. Jeff, did you have a question or a comment on comment?
I did. I'm probably be a little unpopular here, but not that it would stop me. Every few months we talk about ADUs, and every few months I ask the city staff, what progress is there towards the count, and what progress would there be towards coming up with an enforcement strategy? And one of the discussions that often happens is, if you're talking about enforcement, first off, the rental registration is not going to catch a lot of ADUs necessarily just by virtue of people voluntarily signing up, because people who have illegal ADU probably won't sign up until they're caught. So they get caught, and then you're in a position of putting people out on the street. And the logistics that have been covered, you know, there's all sorts of complications. Was the ADU developed by code when it was multifamily before the down zone? Was it after the down zone? So it is illegal, not just non-conforming. So we kind of ground through all those different aspects of the ADU issue, and it keeps getting punted down a few months at a time. And it occurs to me that really the only time to enforce this effectively is probably over the summer, when there's a much higher vacancy rate in the city. So the impact on people is going to be a lot less if the city actually enforces. And so we have a window coming up, and I'm just really curious. You know, it's been a few months, and I'll ask the question, you know, how's the count going? You know, is it an order of magnitude off like I suspect, or is it not? And then what's the enforcement plan? And is it timed towards when there's a higher vacancy rate in the city so that the people that are impacted by it can find other places, or is it not even on the radar at this point? So I think just because that's such a lightning rod, it might be worth explicitly talking about that at the staff level and letting us have an update so that we don't get derailed in the comp plan process just because there's this lingering issue hanging out. So that's pretty much my opinion. I don't know if the chair wants to consider this something to bring an update to the next one, or to actually put Greg on the spot right now, or how we want to integrate that into kind of at least addressing this issue and deciding how we can deal with it without going sideways on the comp plan.
Well, one question that maybe you could answer not right now, but at the next meeting, is where we're at in that ADU ordinance process, because we are engaged in that ADU ordinance process where a lot of these comments were generated again at that time, and is the answer to Jeff's question regarding enforcement contained in, you know, how we're moving that forward, or is that?
Well, the way I was looking at it was the comp plan would generally create the conceptual framework for how we would see accommodating population growth, and that may include ADUs in certain areas or not. It may include certain forms of ADUs. A lot of those technical details will get worked out in the enacting ordinance.
In the ADU ordinance, yeah.
Yeah, which may not, I mean, that's not happening necessarily in a parallel process with the comp plan, as far as I understand. So, again, we don't want to get tied up in the comp plan, so if we're just talking the broad swipes of, you know, is having an ADU idea, concept, acknowledged in the plan appropriate or not, and we let the actual details of it get worked out later. If that's the case, you know, maybe our strategy is a little different.
Okay.
I don't know.
Lisa, did you have a comment on that?
Just a question. If we were to strike out all references of detached ADUs in single-family neighborhoods throughout this plan, does that mean when we do the ADU ordinance, I mean, if we strike out the ADU detached throughout this plan and the single-family neighborhood designation, does that mean when we go through to do the ADU ordinance that we don't have the ability to, if somehow it was identified it's appropriate and welcomed in certain neighborhoods, that we'd have the opportunity to site-specific that in there? Because for a broad stroke document, when we are saying detached in some single-family neighborhoods, but we haven't identified all these issues, it is a lightning rod, and it was a concern I brought up from the beginning.
Yeah, I think the plan, you know, sets the general policy basis, and the language that you guys have come up with says consider allowing owner-occupied detached ADUs. And that's what would happen when we bring the ADU ordinance forward, is we would consider it. You know, it's up to you whether you want to remove any references to detached ADUs. This provides the policy basis for the codes that implement the plan. So if you think that detached ADUs might be appropriate in certain locations, it's appropriate to say that in the plan. If you don't think detached ADUs should be allowed anywhere under any circumstances as a group, then you could remove those references from the comp plan or make a strong statement saying that.
I remember some of the initial discussion before I joined the commission here that, and I do think it was the gentleman to my side here who had mentioned it, about detached being allowed in multifamily, but not in single-family neighborhoods. And it has popped up here, and it's been a concern of mine, but I've kind of sat back thinking, well, this is the broad strokes. And when we get to the actual ordinance, that's where we're going to do the definition. But personally, I would like to see it struck from single-family neighborhoods because, you know, unless it's a new development, but in established neighborhoods, you know, where attached would be appropriate. I think there's just a lot of pushback at the concept of, in our single-family established neighborhoods, having detached. I just can't see how that's going to go forward in the overall plan, so I'm not really comfortable having it in here mentioned in the comprehensive plan. Not to necessarily say everybody else will support that, but I was just kind of wondering that if we did exclude it and it was identified later, does that mean that we could not have it in the ordinance because it was not mentioned in here?
No, not necessarily. But again, you do want to provide the policy direction in the plan. You know, even if there's no reference to it in the comp plan, you could still have an ordinance that allows it. It's just when we're developing regulations to implement the plan, we look to the policies in the plan to provide guidance as the initial starting point.
So, real quick, we're kind of digging into a specific topic, and we could continue to do that because I think this is a conversation that needs to be had by this body based on the comment we've received and what we know the sentiment is in the community on both sides. One of our yellow highlighted items speaks to that policy that has generated so much consternation from some of our public speakers, and so it might make sense to dig in. I'm just throwing this out there. It might make sense to dig into this conversation that Jeff, you and Lisa have kind of broached at the time we tackle that policy item. It's number 15 in our list, or we could do it now. But we're not going through all these now, so we're kind of getting off topic, and I kind of want to absorb what these people said and think about it a little bit. That's just my kind of take on it, unless you want to dig into it.
I didn't want to derail things. I thought, first off, I was interested in the issue and addressing public comment, but also I think conceptually, as we talk about the comp plan as a body, it's interesting to talk about what the boundaries are, what is a general policy statement, versus what is getting more into the weeds of trying to set parameters where we don't really know the details. And it's been brought up. We don't know what the county ADUs are. We don't know what the parameters would be for implementing it. All that's going to get worked out. So, for example, using, again, ADUs as an example, you know, maybe it's not appropriate to try to start drawing lots of boundaries around it, but instead just say maybe something we can all agree on, which might be, okay, well, owner-occupied is something that we think is really important in single-family neighborhoods and not so in multifamily neighborhoods, and that they should be considered in the future, and just stop there. And then once the data's in, you know, we've kind of expressed a policy preference, it's broad, and once we have more information and you're actually looking at implementing ordinance, we'll get into it. And if that's a comp plan approach, then that can carry over to the other recommendations too, because otherwise we can start trying to really nail down a lot of details, and we can spend a lot of time that we probably don't want to spend.
Yeah, I think it's inappropriate. Oh, go ahead, Garrett. I'm sorry. Well, I was just going to say, I think that and Greg, correct me if I'm wrong, the comp plan is not a document that gets into the weeds. It talks about the big picture. So, and I think that you can see that through many of these. So I'm hoping that as we discuss these, this is just my take, but I'm hoping that as we discuss all these issues, that we look at the broader boundaries, and then these implementing ordinances are where you work out the details. And I'm not suggesting on ADUs one way or the other. I'm just saying that when we get to that discussion, we should be thinking about these things in the context of, consider, support. I mean, none of these statements are should, shall, any of these kind of things. They're like, let's think about all these big ideas. So that's just my take on how the comp plan is supposed to be interpreted. I don't know. It seems like staff is giving us the same direction. Is that fair to say?
Well, yeah, I agree with Jeff. I think, you know, the specifics to the ADUs, you know, this is an aspirational document. And I think in some respects it's getting too specific about, you know, owner occupancy, single family. I think those things should be addressed in that ordinance. But I do think it's important to have, you know, a policy statement that ADUs is one of the tools that's been identified as a potential for accommodating infill and accommodating density, and that we should seek flexibility where appropriate with respect to zoning ordinances. So and we'll talk more
I think we're going to
about
have an
that.
opportunity to get into that.
And I think
yeah.
we could draft better language for those specific ADU policies, and I think we will. I do have a quick question for Greg. When this gets presented to City Council after we make our final recommendation, the chapters are as they're substantially written. We have this comment tracker, which is like a synopsis of a lot of the recommendations that we've made, suggestions that we made, that the public has made. How is this going to get presented to City Council for consideration?
Well, our thought was to present them with the original versions of the chapters as they were originally proposed, along with the recommended changes from the Planning Commission.
In the form of a comment tracker, or in a form of
Redline.
a separate policy, a separate document highlighting all the...
Yeah, we've tried to, what we've used in the past, and it seems to work pretty well, is to include all the changes in a separate document.
Okay.
If there aren't that many, producing a red line version is not that difficult. So it just depends on the extent of the changes, I think. If there aren't that many, then we can probably do a fairly simple red line version. But you've got quite a few changes here that you need to talk about. So,
and a lot of chapters.
Yeah, I think it makes sense to keep it a separate document so the council can see the original version, and here are the changes proposed by the commission. That seems to have worked pretty well for council in the past.
So I guess if I can make a suggestion or for thought, as we move forward to our next meeting, we have the original chapters as written. I'm sure everybody's got notes, scribbled throughout. We've had a lot of comments, some good comment tonight that's new. And we have comment trackers that are, have highlighted yellow areas that are staff agrees some change should be made. And as Steve brought up, there's some areas where they suggested no change, and those are topics of discussion. So as we move to that next meeting, I think it'd be appropriate to, send in our proposed changes so that everybody can view them and we could be talking about them in entirety. So if there's issues that are specific to ADUs that you want to address, propose some language so that we could have a good discussion about it, as opposed to doing it on the fly. Homework.
And then turn it in by Monday so that everybody has a chance to review it, and if there's a chance to print it, public can also have an opportunity to look at it if it's posted.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Sooner the better.
I think that's a great suggestion. I don't want anyone here to feel pigeonholed into not being allowed to bring up ideas that are new at the meeting, because I don't think that's appropriate, but I second that thoroughly, that where we can get comments in, it'll be really helpful, not only for us, you're right, but for staff and the public. And yeah, where we can propose policy language, that's the most effective for you, right? We can have a lively discussion about why, but getting those policies down is important for people to see. But I kind of feel like maybe that it's not appropriate to take it too much further tonight, unless anyone else feels differently. Phyllis or Tom, did you have a comment on this?
I just want to make a comment that I view the comprehensive plan and the Growth Management Act as a balancing act. I mean, you've got environment, economy, growth, no growth, transportation versus cars, all kinds of stuff. I mean, as a society, we've used Puget Sound, Samish Sea, whatever you want to call it, as a cesspool. And as we get more and more people in the basin, if we don't do stuff about it, it's going to become a cesspool. And we've got stuff to work out here.
Yeah. Phyllis?
Well, I feel like deja vu, but listening to some of the comments this evening, I'm wondering if we should go back and look at the urban growth areas. I mean, I think we felt that they might have been put to rest some time ago, but is that something that can be reopened?
The city council's already made their recommendation in respect to urban growth areas, and the county council, it looks like the county council is going to agree. They had another meeting on Tuesday and voted to keep U Street in a reserve classification and add this Kitech property as a reserve property. So it looks like that's where it's going to wind up, and our council's already made that recommendation.
So there's no reason for us to go back and revisit that?
You know, it's up to you. I don't think that the city council is going to change their mind about that, nor do I think that it's appropriate for us to go back to the county now and say we've decided something different.
Anybody else? Okay. Well, I think that the plan that kind of Lisa and Garrett kind of both described from different angles, coming back with notes for staff as best we can, and then taking next week as an opportunity to go through the comment tracker in its entirety and any other new issues, and tackle it that way is a good idea. And I again appreciate all the public comment, and like Greg said, we've had 17 meetings and we had public comment opportunity, I think probably 15 of them or something, and we've heard a lot of good and interesting and varied comment, so I think that's appreciated, and especially on a nice night like this, having everyone come out and see us. So unless there's any other comments with that, I'd like to just say we're good with this portion of the meeting and ask staff if there's any other comments that they have for us in general about old new business or anything like that, and move from there.
Mr. Chairman, I don't think so. I think we can adjourn the meeting.
Okay. Oh, Steve. Oh, you know what? I almost forgot. I'm very sorry. Yeah, we had a shoreline committee meeting earlier tonight, and we need to hear a summary from our chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you for reminding me.
Well, tonight, the Planning Commission's subcommittee of the Shoreline Committee met, and we considered 2 items on the agenda tonight. First one was construction of a dissolved air flotation pre-treatment facility next to the existing water treatment plant in order to improve water quality and supply facility next to the plant in Whatcom Falls Park. Second item we considered was the development of stormwater management improvements and upgrades along the C Street terminal within the C Street right-of-way. Both of those topics were approved 2-0 with 1 excused absence, and they will be forwarded to the planning director for recommendation on permitting.
Thank you.
So I had a question. So the C Street, that was stormwater? That was a proposal for stormwater treatment on the C Street, or?
Yeah. Yes.
Is that a port project?
It's a port project, yes.
And the other one was the city project?
It runs along the Whatcom Waterway.
Yeah, that's a major outfall there.
Yeah, they're going to do treatment for water flow into the bay.
Oh, good.
And it's quite an extensive project with a lot of concerns about the environmental conditions that are existing today and preceding other work that's going to be done and protecting it for the future.
Phyllis?
Yes, I'm on the Shorelines Committee, and I'm also on the Mount Baker Theater Board, and we meet before this meeting every first Thursday, which means half of the time that we're normally scheduled for meetings. I'm not available. I've missed 2 of the last 2 Shoreline Committee meetings, so I'm thinking if there's someone else on the commission here who might like to step into that position, it'd be something, if we don't decide it tonight, but it might be practical in case, so we always, because 2 of the quorum means, if I'm not there, it has to be the other 2, so we have to have a backup.
All right, well, that's something for the rest of us to think about.
That's the first Thursday of the month?
Correct. The first Thursday of the month, I'm booked pretty much standing.
So if anyone else would like to join the Shoreline Committee, think it over and let us know. We'll do what we can, Phyllis, in absence of somebody else stepping up to schedule shoreline committee meetings on the third Thursday of the month.
I'm fine
But
with
sometimes
that.
that's not always possible.
No, I know it. That's what I asked.
Can I ask how often they meet? Is it once a month?
No.
Steve?
No, over the past 2.5 years that I've been involved with it, tonight was number 8 meetings. Of those 8, we've only had one time that was not associated or time previous to a planning commission meeting. We started at 5:30, finished up around 6:30, so we had plenty of time. But like I say, tonight was the 8th one in 2.5 years.
Probably one every 2 or 3 months. Yeah. Every 3, yeah.
Right.
If nobody else is just chomping at the bit and wanting to step in, I would be willing.
Well, that is a very nice offer.
Very good.
Do you want to memorialize that now? I mean, are you
I
really?
I heard there's an expense account with no.
Yeah.
Still waiting.
Is that something that you feel comfortable? You'd be willing to do? I really appreciate that. I'm sure all of us do. And if that's the case, then do we need to go through any process to make that happen? Nominating process or anything, Heather?
The chair of the planning commission nominates the committee or appoints the committee members.
I do. Okay. Can I do that now? All right. Well, I'm going to appoint Lisa, and Phyllis, you can take your leave from that committee. You don't have to worry about it. Thank you, Lisa.
I love being
That's
on
awesome.
it, but I just don't feel it's fair to the
Yeah,
committee.
the projects are very interesting that you see because they're like what Steve talked about. They're really random. So I did it for 1 year, but for that left. Okay, great. Well, thank you, everybody. And again, as Garrett suggested, encourage everybody where they can to submit comments to staff. And I would suggest that maybe if it's already in here and you know we're going to be going through it, and you don't need to make your comment. This is just my suggestion, so we don't get burdened down. Unless you're proposing a change to what's on here, then go for it. But if it's just a comment on that, we can have that. We're going to have a lively discussion about all this. And so just to make it easier for staff so they're not doubling up or duplicating things, maybe only in those instances, you really only need the information where it's something new or a change to one of these existing ones or a new idea about one of these existing ones. Okay. All right, thank you. We will adjourn. Thank you, everybody.